Good afternoon. Pastor Cameron here of Community Church. This is Sermons in 7, the Gospel of Mark. Well, if you've been trekking with us through this gospel, we finally come to chapter 7, verses 31 through 37, where this is titled that Jesus is going to heal a deaf and mute man in the vicinity of the Decapolis. Well, you know, chapter 7 starts out with Jesus having a conversation with the Pharisees, and he does what? He gets to the heart of the matter. They start asking questions about, why do your disciples not, wash their hands? And Jesus then starts talking about the traditions. And he's saying, you know what? He says here, and this is harsh to hear. Jesus says in verse 13, thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And so we have to be careful with our traditions. Traditions aren't bad necessarily in and of themselves, but if they hinder someone from coming to the Lord, then guess what? They're messed up. We do not want to nullify the word of God with our tradition. Well, then he goes on and he starts talking about a deeper issue within the heart. He says in verse 21, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Jesus is dealing with the heart of the issue, which is exactly the heart. Well, then he leaves and goes to the vicinity of Tyre, and he enters a house and does not want anyone to know where it is. So presumably he's going there to rest. But guess what? A woman comes. A woman finds him, and her daughter has been possessed by a demon. And, the portion of the parallel story with this of Matthew chapter 15, she goes, and the disciples don't want her to come to Jesus. And so she has to deal with a bunch of different barriers. She has to deal with the fact that she's a woman, so she has got a gender barrier that she needs to cross. She has to deal with the fact that she's not Jewish, so she has an ethnicity, an ethnic barrier that she has to cross. She has to deal with the fact that, you know what? Satan is against her. She's got to cross that barrier. But in her desperation, she finds Jesus. And this is where we pick up, right? He heals her daughter. He marvels at her faith. And this is where we pick up in Mark chapter 7. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis. So, as the late Warren Wiersbe would write, that this was a Roman, city of 10 cities, if you will. And that this was a Gentile area. This was a Gentile area. In verse 32, there are some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on them. I want you to catch this with me for a second, right? The Decapolis was a Gentile area. Now, we don't know the ethnicity of the men who brought their friend to Jesus, but I think one could probably reasonably assume that they may have been Gentile, right? And if they were, what you have is these men who bring their friend who has a need to a Jewish rabbi. Why weren't they sacrificing to all these other gods? If they were in fact Gentile, if they were Roman, if they could have worshiped the pantheon of gods, why did they not do that? Why did they just think of the stigma that would attach them to them if they brought their friend to a Jewish rabbi. Now let's just say that they were Jewish and they were living in that area. Still, you have this Jewish rabbi teacher, and they were desperate enough to bring their friend to him who had a legitimate need. The application for myself and for you today is, when was the last time you brought someone in your life who has a need to Jesus? Now, we can do this a number of different ways. We can do this through prayer. But we can also do this by actually inviting them out to church, inviting them out to a service, saying, listen, I get it. Your life is messed up right now. You have a legitimate need, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. You have a need, and I know someone who can help you. We serve the God of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And he can help you with your need. Listen, friends, we need to do better about bringing our friends who have needs to Jesus through prayer and through an invitation through church, to service. Look at what Jesus does here, though. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears, then spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven, and with a deep sigh, he said to him, and I'm not going to try to pronounce this because I'm going to botch it, but this word, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. And actually, Matthew 15:31 says that they praised the God of Israel. What a testimony. But what does Jesus do? He gets this man brought to him, and then he takes him away. He takes him away to a private place. Listen, we are in a culture that is filled with noise, that is filled with busyness, that is filled with connectivity. Yet in a culture of connectivity, why are we so alone? Why do we feel so isolated? Sometimes, a lot of times, you and I just need to be brought to a place, a private place, where we can encounter Jesus, away from the noise, away from the quote-unquote connectivity, away from the social media. We need to find a place where we connect. And then Jesus does what? Jesus heals this man, but he sighs. He's like this deep groaning within him. Why? Because of the bondage that this man was in. The Lord cares about your pain. The Lord cares about what's going on in your life. The Lord cares about the fact that sin has just completely destroyed our relationship with him. And so, in way of application for us today, the Lord hears you, the Lord knows you, the Lord sees you, the Lord cares for you. Get away to a place where you can meet with him privately and bring others to Jesus. God bless you. See you next time.